The words didn't just echo in the quiet kitchen, they shattered it. The three little girls stood frozen near the doorway, their identical faces pale, their tiny hands still clutching the lunchboxes their father had packed only an hour earlier. The world they knew, structured, careful, held together by their father's gentle strength, had cracked open without warning. In that single moment, the triplets realized something terrifying. The one person who had never left them might not be there tonight. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of unexpected love, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the people we almost lose are the ones who teach us how to live again. Their father, Daniel Harper, had always been their constant. 3 years earlier, their mother had walked out of their lives with a suitcase and a promise she never kept. Since then, Daniel had become everything: braider of hair, maker of pancakes shaped like hearts, comforter of nightmares, and silent warrior against exhaustion. He worked long hours as a paramedic, saving strangers while quietly holding himself together for the sake of his daughters, Lily, Emma, and Ava. That morning had been like any other. Daniel had woken before dawn, preparing oatmeal and placing handwritten notes into each lunchbox. He always wrote something different for each girl, even though they looked exactly alike. Lily's note had told her she was brave. Emma's reminded her she was kind. Ava's promised she was stronger than she knew. He believed in speaking to who they were becoming, not just who they were. But halfway through his shift, while lifting a patient onto a stretcher, a sharp pain had shot through his chest. He tried to ignore it. Single fathers didn't have time for weakness. Yet the pain intensified, spreading like wildfire through his ribs and down his arm. His partner insisted they pull over. Within minutes, Daniel found himself lying on the very stretcher he had pushed for years, staring up at ambulance lights he once controlled. By noon, he was admitted to the hospital with a severe cardiac condition brought on by stress and exhaustion. The doctors said he would recover, but only if he rested, only if he stopped carrying the entire world alone. The girls didn't understand medical terminology. They only knew their father wasn't coming home. Their neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, took them in for the evening. She was kind, but kindness from strangers doesn't replace the warmth of a parent's hug. That night, the triplets lay side by side in a guest bed far too small for their combined fear. They whispered under the blankets, their minds racing toward one unspoken thought: what if Dad doesn't come back the same? In the darkness, Lily remembered something. 2 weeks earlier, Daniel had dressed nervously for dinner. It had been the first time since their mother left that he agreed to meet someone new. The woman's name was Sarah Mitchell. She was a librarian who loved old movies and had once baked cookies for the girls when Daniel couldn't make it to a school event. The girls had liked her immediately. She didn't try to replace their mom, she simply listened. She asked about their favorite books and remembered the answers. But Daniel had come home from that dinner alone. He told the girls he had been called into an emergency. That was true. But what he didn't say was that he had seen fear in Sarah's eyes before he left. Fear not of him, but of the life that came with him. 3 children, late-night shifts, emotional scars. She had smiled kindly when he apologized, yet something fragile had shifted. He hadn't called her again. He assumed she deserved someone less complicated. Now, lying in Mrs. Alvarez's spare bedroom, Lily whispered what the others were thinking. Maybe they should find her. Emma hesitated. Ava worried it wasn't their place. But children understand something adults forget. When someone matters, you don't let pride keep you apart. The next morning, with Mrs. Alvarez's reluctant permission and a printed address found in Daniel's old planner, the triplets walked 3 blocks to the small brick house with blue shutters. Their steps were small but determined. They weren't just visiting a stranger. They were searching for hope. Sarah opened the door wearing a soft sweater in confusion. For a moment, she didn't recognize the girls standing on her porch. Then her face softened. She remembered the identical ponytails, the shy smiles, the way they had clung to her during that school bake sale. The words tumbled out of Lily first. Dad's in the hospital. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. She hadn't stopped thinking about Daniel. The night he left their dinner to respond to an emergency had only confirmed what she already admired about him. He was selfless to a fault. But she had been scared, not of the girls, not of responsibility. She had been afraid of loving someone whose life demanded so much. She had convinced herself that stepping back was protecting her own heart. Now 3 little hearts stood in front of her, trembling. She didn't ask why they came. She didn't ask what role she was supposed to play. She grabbed her coat and car keys. At the hospital, Daniel looked smaller than the girls remembered. Machines hummed beside him, tracing the fragile rhythm of his heartbeat. The sight terrified them. They approached cautiously, each taking one of his hands. When Sarah stepped into the room, something shifted. Daniel opened his eyes slowly. For a moment, confusion clouded his face. Then recognition. Not just of Sarah, but of the choice standing before him. He had spent years believing he had to carry everything alone. Seeing Sarah beside his daughters, he felt something unfamiliar, relief. The doctors explained the seriousness of his condition. It wasn't a heart attack, but it was a warning. If he continued living under constant stress, the next episode could be worse. He needed rest. He needed help. That word, help, had always tasted like failure to Daniel. But Sarah didn't see weakness in him. She saw a man who had given everything for his children and forgotten himself. Over the next few days, she coordinated meals, drove the girls to school, and sat by Daniel's bedside reading the same novel they once discussed over coffee. She didn't pressure him about the past, she simply showed up. The triplets watched carefully. Children measure love not by promises but by presence. Sarah was there each morning and each night. She braided hair clumsily at first, laughing when it came out uneven. She attended a parent-teacher meeting and introduced herself not as their mother, not as their father's girlfriend, but as someone who cared deeply about their family. Daniel struggled with guilt. He worried he was burdening her. He worried the girls would grow attached only to be disappointed again. One evening, as hospital sunlight faded into amber, he realized something. He had been protecting everyone from potential pain, while unknowingly denying them potential joy. Recovery was slow. Daniel returned home with strict instructions to reduce his hours. Financially, that terrified him. But Sarah proposed something unexpected. She offered to move her remote library consulting work to his house temporarily, helping with the girls while he healed. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture. It was practical, grounded, real. The house, once filled with quiet exhaustion, began to feel lighter. The girls' laughter returned fully. Daniel learned to sit on the couch without checking emails. He allowed Sarah to cook dinner. He allowed himself to rest. Weeks later, on a cool autumn afternoon, Daniel stood in the backyard watching his daughters chase falling leaves. Sarah stood beside him, her hand brushing his. He realized that the life he feared was too complicated was actually fuller than he had imagined. He turned to her and admitted something he had never said out loud. He had stood her up not just because of the emergency, but because he assumed she deserved easier love. She smiled gently and told him something equally honest. Easy love isn't always meaningful love. Time passed. Healing came not only to Daniel's heart, but to the fragile spaces in all of them. Sarah never tried to replace what was lost. She simply added something new. Before this story ends, we have a special request. If you've ever experienced a second chance that changed your life, comment "Second chances matter" below. Let's fill this space with reminders that love can return in unexpected ways. 1 year later, Daniel stood in the hospital again, but this time in a different room. He wasn't a patient. He was volunteering part-time, sharing his story with overworked staff about recognizing limits before breaking. He had learned that strength isn't measured by how much you carry alone, but by how bravely you let others walk beside you. The triplets had grown taller. Their ponytails were longer, their laughter louder. Sarah had become a steady presence. Not a replacement, not a rescuer, but a partner. In rebuilding something beautiful on the anniversary of Daniel's hospitalization, the girls surprised him with a small framed photo. It was taken the day they knocked on Sarah's door. In it, the 3 of them stood nervously on the porch, unaware that their courage was about to change all their lives. Daniel realized something profound. The bravest hearts in his family were not his own. They belonged to 3 little girls who refused to let fear win. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like, share, and comment. Your engagement helps stories of hope reach more people who might need them today. Because sometimes, the sentence that begins with "Dad's in the hospital" doesn't end in tragedy. Sometimes it becomes the beginning of healing. Sometimes it leads 3 small hands to knock on a door that was never fully closed. And sometimes, in the quiet after fear, love walks back in, stronger, steadier, and finally ready to stay.